Good morning. It's good to see everyone out here this morning. Not only do we have these here, uh, we have a good number here, but we also have those joining us via the internet. We have some 30 or 40 who watch us live, and then we have several who watch us throughout the week and such. And so uh, we have a good number and welcome you this morning. This being the Lord's Day, we're going to talk about hope this morning. 1 Corinthians 15, but we're going to go through the Sermon on the Mount in particular. As we talk about hope, I want to begin by one announcement. You know, from time to time, we announce those who have anniversaries for 40, 50, 60 years or so, and we want to recognize Ed and Margaret Sharp. Today's their anniversary, 67 years. Isn't that wonderful? And Margaret is only 39. And it's wonderful on that. It is it's just amazing. Isn't that great news? That you talk about hope. Well, I hope to live to be 67 for one. And then to be married 67 years. Isn't that wonderful? Just a joy in that. Just uh, 67 years. Very few. You know, even 40 or 50 years. That's a milestone with that. And for above that, 67 years. That's wonderful. Congratulations to you. If in this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all men most miserable, as we said in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 19. And so I want to talk about hope and hope in this life because I do have hope in this life. There's several things we're going to talk about being hope in this life, but he said hope is not limited just to this life, but if it's limited just to this life, there's something that we're missing. But we do have value of hope in this life. And we're going to go to the Sermon on the Mount. We talked about the Sermon on the Mount a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the authority of Jesus. And the last verse in Matthew chapter 7 said that the people were amazed because Jesus spoke with authority, not as the scribes. And so as he spoke with authority, we're going to see what he spoke about in dealing with hope. In hope, Jesus said the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, Jesus sets the groundwork of all of his ministry. He's saying that these are the kind of people that I want to be surrounded with. These are the kind of people that we ought to be. These are the kind of people that I want to give hope to. I want to change your life, he was saying. And when he spoke to the people, you read through Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus set the groundwork. I believe I have hope in this life. I have hope in several areas. We're going to talk about three areas in this life that we have hope. And then we'll talk about the fourth area, the hope that we have after this life. I have hope in this life. Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 through 45. Turn there. I have hope, number one, that love conquers hate. That gives me hope in this life. I know that there's hatred in this world, and we see this televised throughout the television. It seems that all we can see is the bad that's going on in our country and in our nation, throughout the world even, because that's what sells. When you talk about the bad news, the sensationalism of it, and that's what is promoted. But you know, there's a lot of good going on in our nation, in our world. Love conquers hate. And Jesus talks about this. And this gives me hope to say that I believe that that we ought to be people of love, not hate. Listen to what Jesus said. Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. He's talking about the old law, whenever he's quoting the law of Moses, and the law of Moses was just setting justice. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye or tooth for tooth. You see, before that it was that if you hurt me, I'll let you know in some way. I'll retaliate in such a way that you will never even think about harming me in it. You know, if you harm me with words, I'll badmouth you in such a way that you won't even think about that. If you hurt me, you hit me with your hand, I'll come with a club. You come with a club, I'll come with a knife. You come with a knife, I'll come with a gun. Well, they didn't have guns when the law of Moses, but you know what I mean. You know. And so it was that I'll get you back worse than you ever thought about getting me. And so the law of Moses is just bringing justice. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. The justice. And so he said, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I'll tell you, not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek to him. And whoever takes your tunic, then give him your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. The second mile rule. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. You've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who despitefully use you and persecute you. That's love. That's turning the other cheek, going the second mile. For your enemies, pray for your enemies. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for those who despitefully use you. And that's going on today. Turning the other cheek. Going the second mile. Oh, it's not in the news. That doesn't sell newspapers. That doesn't get your ratings up in the news to say, look at all the good that's being done in the United States of America today. Look at all the people who love one another. Look at all the people who take care of one another, who look after those who are less fortunate. That doesn't sell, but it's happening. And Jesus began to teach this. And so when we talk about I have hope that love conquers hate. And Jesus said this, love your neighbor. Bless those that curse you. Do good to those that hate you. Turn the other cheek. Go the second mile. If in this life only we have hope, we're of all men most miserable. I have hope that God is a God of love. God is love. 1 John 4, verse 8. God is not just the character of love, but He shows us love. John 3, verse 16. God so loved the world that He shows us what love is and shows us how to love one another. And so we love one another. I have hope in this life that love abounds and love conquers hate. Number 2, going through the Matthew chapter 5, 6. Turn to Matthew chapter 6, verse 12 through 15. I have hope that forgiveness conquers bitterness. If we don't have a forgiving heart, if we just let that bitterness continue to dwell in us and fester in us, it affects our whole life. I have hope that forgiveness conquers bitterness. Look at verse 12 when Jesus said, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. Forgiveness. It seems that we want to be forgiven. I want to be forgiven. How many times do I want to be forgiven? I want to be forgiven every time. But how many times am I willing to forgive? Well, as many times as I want to be forgiven, I'm willing to forgive. Otherwise, he says that you're really not the type of person that Jesus wants you to be. Forgive those who trespass against you. And we do have that. That's just human nature. We're not perfect. Sometimes it is that we, as Christians, we say one thing or another and hurt someone. We do one thing or another, and we need to be forgiven. And sometimes we do it on purpose, intending to hurt them. And sometimes it is, maybe we do it and don't realize what we're doing. But forgiveness. I believe that forgiveness conquers bitterness. And that we need to be forgiving people, or it is that we have that bitterness indwell within us. I can think of no better example of forgiveness whenever Jesus was on the cross. And it was that he had faced it all night of a mock trial. They had no charge against him. And so they brought in false witnesses, one after another, claiming this or that, claiming he blasphemed God, claiming he was against the Roman Empire, being a traitor because he said that God is Lord. They couldn't bring any accusation against him. Pilate knew that. Pilate knew that Jesus was innocent. But they brought these false accusations. They spit upon him. They slapped him. They put a crown of thorns on him. They beat his back. Blood ran. His back was torn. The flesh was torn open. Blood flowed. And then they put this mock royal robe on his back. Hail Jesus, King of the Jews. They mocked him. And when they ripped that robe off, all that blood all those wounds were just open again. And on the cross, Jesus did not say, I'm dying for the whole world of sinners except the ones that said, crucify me. Well, he didn't say that, did he? He didn't say, listen, y'all had your chance. I was here for 3 years preaching and teaching. You had your chance to repent and you didn't do it. I'm just marking you off. I'm not dying for you. You went and crucified me. No, he said, Father, forgive them. Some of the most tenderest words, precious words of forgiveness, even on the cross. He said, I forgive you. Can you imagine him looking over the people as he's hanging from the cross, seeing those in the mob, the ones that had cried out, crucify him, crucify him. And he says, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Tender words of forgiveness. He not only says in Matthew chapter 5, turn the other cheek. Jesus turned the other cheek. He not only said, when we read it, to pray for those who despitefully use you, persecute you. He prayed for their forgiveness. I believe that forgiveness conquers bitterness. And that gives me hope. I believe that we are a society of forgiving people. I know that we have those that some won't forgive and some hold bitterness in their heart for years. I know particularly of a family whose mother passed away. The father had already passed away. The mother passed away. The family was dividing up the belongings, and there wasn't much at all. But two sisters wanted the same thing, and only one got it. And the other was so unforgiving, they didn't speak to each other for years. It's only when this other sister had cancer and they knew her days were not long that the other sister came and they forgave each other, got back with each other. But they missed years together. Bitterness because of what we would say nothing. But what is it what is so important that we hold bitterness and harbor bitterness in our heart that we can't forgive one another? I believe we are forgiving people. I believe that forgiveness conquers bitterness. And then go on to Matthew chapter 6, beginning in verse 19. I believe that giving conquers selfishness. It is that what we have, we want to keep. And we understand this. But look at what Jesus said about forgiveness, about giving. He said, lay up not for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He's talking about physical things and what's our treasure and what's important to us. And what is important? On the day of judgment, when we stand before God, I don't know when the day of judgment is. I don't know whether Jesus will return during my lifetime and we'll see him return in the air, or I'll pass away and wake up to that judgment day. But you know, on that judgment day, God's not going to care. How many square feet was your house? How big was your house? How many cars did you have? How new were those cars? What was your bank account? He's not going to ask those type of questions. He's going to ask about, did you love your neighbor? Did you forgive your neighbor? Where was your heart? Where did you lay up treasures? In Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 15, I'll read verse 15 in just a minute, but it was a man came to Jesus and he said, Master, can you divide our inheritance between me and my brother? And there, as Jesus perceived a problem with this man, it seemed like an innocent enough question, doesn't it? Can you divide the inheritance between me and my brother? But Jesus perceived his heart. Now the man knew the law, and the law was quite clear about possessions and what you had in dividing the inheritance. And so there's something a little bit deeper than it was that whenever he went to Jesus and said, can you divide my inheritance between me and my brother? And Jesus said this in verse 15. He said, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life does not consist in the abundance of the things which he possesses. Jesus went to the heart of the problem. Covetousness. A man's life consists or does not consist in the things which he possesses. Giving conquers selfishness. The man was selfish. He was coveting. And Jesus perceived this. He was laying up for himself treasures here on this earth. This was where his heart was. And so in his giving, he wasn't willing to share and give to his brother. So I believe three things that give me hope in this life. Number one, love conquers hate. Forgiveness conquers bitterness, and giving conquers selfishness. But 1 Corinthians 15 says, if in this life only we have hope, we are of all men most miserable. And so I have hope in this life. I have hope that the good of people will prevail. I have hope that when we see and when we talk about Jesus, and we talk about Christianity, and we talk about God, we talk about love and forgiveness and giving to one another and laying up treasures in heaven, not treasures on this earth. And when we talk about character of people here, that gives me hope. But in this life only we have hope. Paul said, this life will end. One day, we all know it's coming. Our hearts are with the Spence family, the passing of June Spence. A sweet, sweet lady. She'll be missed here so much. But we understand that death is a part of living, a part of life. And we understand, too, that this is not the end. If in this life only we have hope, we're of all men most miserable. And that's why we're That's why we assemble today. One of the reasons I know we assemble to get together to encourage one another and share with one another and see one another and give one another hope in this life. But we're here because the tomb is empty. Paul said, I believe that Jesus rose from the grave. And I'm preaching that Jesus rose from the grave. And if he didn't rise from the grave, then my preaching is empty and my faith is in vain. And there is no hope after this life. But I believe that the tomb was empty. I know that Jesus said, in 3 days I'll rise again. I know that the Jews went to Pilate and said, you seal that tomb. He said on the third day he's going to rise. You set guards there. You seal that tomb. You make sure that there's no way that someone comes and steals the body. But on the third day, there was an earthquake. And the stone was rolled away. And Jesus rose from that tomb, and the tomb is empty today, and He is there, sitting at the right hand of God. He's in heaven just waiting for us to join Him. If in this life only we have hope, we're of all men most miserable. I want to go to heaven. I enjoy this life. I enjoy the hope that this life gives me. I enjoy the people that I'm in contact with this life. But there's more than this life. I want to go to heaven. I want to do everything I can here on earth to go to heaven, and I want to take as many people with me as possible. I want to go to heaven. My hope, not just in this life. I have hope in love and forgiveness and giving and other things. But my hope, there is a God. He is alive. In Him we live and we strive. That's a great song. That's a great song to sing right before I preach too. I get all excited about that. There is a God. I want to preach about heaven. And so Paul is saying to those in Corinth, yes, there is a resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15, if you read the first 4 or 5 verses, well, 6 verses, he talks about the resurrection. He talks about when Jesus rose from the grave, it wasn't that He did it in secret. He said over 500 people saw Him. Remember Thomas? When the apostles came to Thomas and said, Jesus rose from the grave, and Thomas said, unless I see Him, and unless I see the wounds in His hands, and put my hand in the side where the spear was, then I'll believe that He rose from the grave. And Jesus appeared later on and said, Thomas, here I am. Here are the prints in my hand. Here's the wound in my side. And Thomas fell down and said, my Lord and my God. Over 500 saw it. You could go and talk to witnesses. I saw Jesus after He was crucified, after He arose from the grave. And then in Acts chapter 1, we see Jesus ascending up into heaven. He gives a promise in John 14 that where I am, there you will be also. I want to go to heaven. That's my hope. That's why I'm a Christian. I want to go to heaven. So that's our hope. If in this life only we have hope, we're of all men most miserable. But I have hope in this life. I have hope that there's good in people, and there is. We must not dwell upon the minority of people that don't have love or not forgiving. That's just a few people. I believe in the goodness of mankind. I believe that goodness, love, forgiveness, a giving, sharing heart is prevalent. But I want to go to heaven. How about you? I know you do too. If there's any way that we can encourage you or help you, strengthen you, talk with you, or about heaven, and just anything that we can do to encourage one another. We offer the invitation for one who wishes to become a Christian and be baptized, to put on his Lord in baptism, to go down into the water, be buried with Christ, to have their sins washed away. Or we have, from time to time, people who say, I'm weak at this time, or I'm discouraged at this time, and I need your prayers. I need your help. If we can help you and encourage you in any way, I want you to respond right now while we stand and while we sing.